The air in the room felt thick, heavy with the scent of expensive cigars and the unspoken weight of power. Hannah sat across from Mr. Lee, the dim light from the single ornate lamp casting long shadows that made his face seem even more chiseled, more unyielding. He was her husband, a man whose presence filled every space he occupied, a man whose very name commanded fear and respect in certain circles. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "The old man, Mr. Kim," he began, his voice a low rumble. "He was causing problems, interfering with our operations." Hannah's stomach tightened. She knew Mr. Kim not well, but enough to know he ran a small struggling grocery store in Koreatown. He was a kind man, always offering her a discount on kimchi. Mr. Lee casually continued, "I had his business taken care of. He won't be a problem anymore." The words hung in the air, cold and definitive. Hannah felt a jolt, a sudden sharp pain in her chest. Mr. Kim, his small, honest business, his quiet life, gone. Just like that. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of images. Mr. Kim's tired but friendly smile, the smell of fresh produce in his tiny store, the way he always remembered her favorite brand of rice cakes. Mr. Lee had just crushed all of that, without a second thought, without a flicker of remorse. It wasn't the first time he'd alluded to such things, but this felt different. This was personal. This was someone she knew, someone innocent, caught in the gears of his brutal machine. A cold calm settled over Hannah. She looked at her husband, his eyes dark and unreadable, watching her reaction. He expected an outburst, maybe tears, perhaps a plea for mercy she knew he would never grant. But something inside her snapped. The fear, the sadness, the quiet resentment she'd carried for so long, it all coalesced into a hard, unyielding core. She took a slow breath, the expensive air filling her lungs, and met his gaze. "I understand," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, almost flat. The words were simple, almost dismissive, but they carried a hidden depth, a promise he couldn't possibly discern. A tiny, almost invisible tremor ran through the room, a subtle shift in the heavy silence. A faint flicker, like a short circuit, made the ornate lamp above them dim for a split second before brightening again. Mr. Lee barely noticed, dismissing it as a minor electrical fault in the old building. He didn't see the tiny crack appear in the expensive porcelain vase on the side table, a hairline fracture that spiderwebbed almost imperceptibly from the base. Indeed, the seeds of ruin were often sown in silence. He merely nodded, satisfied with her subdued response. "Good," he grunted, taking a long drag from his cigar. "It's better this way. Less trouble for everyone." He didn't see the ice forming in Hannah's heart, the steel replacing her fear. He didn't see the resolve hardening her features, a silent vow being made in the depths of her soul. He thought he had extinguished her spirit, but he had only forged it into something far more dangerous. He stood up, signaling the end of their conversation, completely oblivious to the profound shift that had just occurred. He turned to leave the room, his imposing figure disappearing into the shadows, leaving Hannah alone with her thoughts and a chilling new determination. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are watching from in the comments. Hannah's life before Mr. Lee had been a tapestry, woven with the vibrant threads of Koreatown in Los Angeles. She grew up in a small, bustling apartment above her parents' dry cleaning business. The scent of starch and detergent, a constant comforting presence. Her days were filled with the chatter of Korean, the aroma of galbi grilling at street vendors, and the rhythmic clang of pots and pans from her grandmother's kitchen. Family was everything. Sundays were sacred, spent at church, followed by enormous meals where generations gathered, sharing stories and laughter. Her parents, immigrants who had worked tirelessly, instilled in her the values of hard work, respect for elders, and the importance of community. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and a fierce pride in their heritage. Even amidst the traditions, Hana harbored a secret dream. While her mother hoped she'd marry a good Korean man and settle down, Hana envisioned herself in the world of fashion. She spent hours sketching designs in a worn notebook, patterns of flowing silk and sharp tailoring filling the pages. She loved the feel of fabrics, the way colors could tell a story, the power of a well-made garment. She dreamt of Paris runways, of her designs being celebrated, of a life where her creativity could truly flourish. It was a stark contrast to the practical, grounded life her family expected. This longing for something more, for an escape from the predictable path, made her vulnerable. She yearned for genuine connection, for someone who saw beyond the dutiful daughter and recognized the artist within. She wanted understanding, a partner who would champion her aspirations, not just tolerate them. Then Mr. Lee entered her world. He wasn't like the men she knew from Koreatown. He arrived in a sleek black car, spoke with an air of quiet authority, and dressed in suits that looked like they cost more than her parents' entire business. He was introduced through a mutual acquaintance, a distant family friend who spoke of his immense success in investments. To Hana, he seemed like a figure from a different universe, powerful and self-assured. He was charming, attentive, and spoke of a life beyond the confines of her familiar neighborhood. He promised a world of luxury, a life where her dreams of fashion could finally take flight, unburdened by financial worries. He saw her sketches, praised her talent, and spoke of opening a boutique for her, a place where she could bring her visions to life. He wasn't overtly flashy, but his presence commanded attention. He showered her with gifts, not gaudy jewelry, but thoughtful items. A rare art book, an antique sewing machine, tickets to a fashion show in New York. He listened intently when she spoke of her designs, making her feel seen and understood in a way no one else had. He represented security, a gateway to a life she had only dared to dream of, a stark contrast to the modest, sometimes struggling existence she knew. His appeal was undeniable. He offered a sense of stability, a strong hand to guide her, and the promise of a future free from the constraints of tradition and financial worry. The entanglement was gradual, almost imperceptible. She was drawn into his orbit, mesmerized by his confidence and the seemingly endless possibilities he presented. She saw him as her protector, her benefactor, the man who could lift her out of her humble beginnings and into the glittering world she longed for. She didn't see the shadows gathering around him, the unspoken warnings, or the subtle ways he began to weave himself into every aspect of her life. She was too busy falling for the dream he painted, a dream that felt so real, so within reach. The dazzling image Mr. Lee presented slowly began to crack. Not all at once, but in pieces, like a mosaic falling apart. Hana started noticing things, small at first, then larger, that chipped away at her trust and affection. He had promised a future built on legitimate business, a future where her fashion dreams could thrive without any shadow. But those promises turned out to be just words, hollow and fleeting. Instead of opening a boutique, he would give her large sums of cash, telling her to buy expensive fabrics, but always with a vague instruction, never a clear business plan. It felt less like an investment in her talent and more like a way to spend money he couldn't explain. His manipulation was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. He'd suggest, ever so gently, that her old friends weren't truly good for her, that they didn't understand her new life. He'd point out their modest circumstances, implying they were holding her back. He'd make light of her family's traditions, saying they were old-fashioned, not suitable for someone with her potential. Slowly, without even realizing it, Hannah found herself drifting away from the people who had always been her anchors. Phone calls became less frequent. Visits stopped altogether. She was becoming isolated, dependent solely on him for connection and validation. Then there were the veiled humiliations. He would critique her designs, not with constructive advice, but with cutting remarks disguised as concern. "That's too simple for a woman of your standing, Hannah," he'd say. Or, "Are you sure this fabric is expensive enough? People will talk." He made her doubt her own artistic vision, making her feel like she needed his approval for everything. Sometimes he would introduce her to his business associates, men much older, much colder, and then praise her beauty in a way that felt less like admiration and more like ownership, making her feel like an ornament rather than a partner. The real moral conflict began when his criminal activities started to bleed into her awareness, not as abstract concepts, but as direct impacts on innocent people. She remembered Mr. Kim, the owner of a small grocery store near her parents' old neighborhood. He was a kind, quiet man who always gave her extra candy as a child. One day, his store was suddenly closed, boarded up. Hannah heard whispers in the community, hushed tones about Mr. Lee's business expansion, and how Mr. Kim had refused to sell his property. The next thing she knew, Mr. Kim and his family had vanished. The guilt gnawed at her, a bitter taste in her mouth. She knew, deep down, that Mr. Lee was behind it, that his business was crushing lives. Another time, a young woman, barely out of high school, who worked at a restaurant Mr. Lee frequented, came to Hannah for help. The woman's brother had borrowed money from one of Mr. Lee's associates and couldn't pay it back. The threats were escalating, and the family was terrified. Hannah secretly gave the woman some money, enough to cover part of the debt. But the look of fear in the young woman's eyes, the desperation, stayed with her. These moments, set against the unspoken codes of their Korean-American community, where you didn't question powerful men, where family honor was paramount, and where silence was often seen as strength, created a deep moral chasm within her. She was living a life of luxury built on the suffering of others, and it was slowly suffocating her. Each broken promise, each subtle manipulation, each veiled insult, each injustice she witnessed piled up. They were not just isolated incidents, they were heavy stones added to a burden she carried every day. The dramatic event in Part 1, the casual mention of violence against someone she cared for, wasn't the first crack. It was the final, devastating blow, the last straw that broke her spirit, the culmination of years of emotional abuse and moral compromise. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about what she had allowed herself to become a part of, and the innocent lives that were being crushed under the weight of his empire. The emotional atmosphere in Hannah's life became a constant, suffocating pressure. It felt like the walls of their opulent home were closing in, each expensive furnishing a reminder of her gilded cage. Mr. Lee's control tightened around her, not with overt commands, but with a subtle, insidious grip that left her feeling like she couldn't breathe. His temper, once a simmering undercurrent, now flared with alarming frequency and intensity. Minor inconveniences, a misplaced document, a delayed dinner, could set him off, his voice rising, his words cutting. His demands, always present, grew more unreasonable, stretching her patience and her sense of self thinner and thinner. Arguments, once rare, and quickly smoothed over, became a regular feature of their days. They were often sparked by his criminal activities, his casual discussions of deals and threats, which Hannah found increasingly difficult to stomach. She would try to interject, to question the morality of his actions, to suggest a different path. But her words were always met with a dismissive wave of his hand or a sharp, cold stare. "You don't understand these things, Hannah," he would say, his tone laced with condescension. "This is how business is done." Her discomfort grew into a gnawing dread, a constant companion that whispered in her ear. The social pressures from the community added another layer to her torment. She felt the unspoken judgment in the lowered gazes of some women at church, the quick nervous smiles from shopkeepers in Koreatown. They either feared Mr. Lee's power, a silent, invisible threat that hung over everyone, or they secretly disapproved of her association with him, seeing her as a woman who had traded her soul for luxury. Neighbors who once offered warm greetings now averted their eyes. Relatives, especially those connected to her parents' more traditional circle, would whisper behind cupped hands, their words carrying the weight of disapproval and pity. This added to her profound sense of isolation and shame. She felt like an outcast, trapped in a life she hadn't truly chosen, yet unable to escape the consequences. Mr. Lee's public persona was a stark contrast to the man she lived with. In public, he was the philanthropic businessman, the generous donor to community events, the pillar of the Korean American society. He would smile broadly, shake hands firmly, and speak with an air of dignified authority. He'd make grand gestures, funding scholarships or community centers, and people would praise his vision and his success. But behind the closed doors of their home, he was a tyrant, his eyes cold, his words sharp, his presence oppressive. This unbearable duality was tearing Hannah apart. She was forced to play the role of the devoted wife, smiling beside him at galas, nodding politely at his speeches, all while a storm raged inside her. Every day felt like a performance, a carefully choreographed dance to maintain appearances. She perfected the art of the neutral expression, the polite laugh, the subtle nod, anything to avoid drawing his ire or the community's scrutiny. She spent countless hours alone in her studio, not designing but staring blankly at fabric swatches, her dreams of creativity now feeling like a distant, impossible fantasy. The vibrant colors she once loved seemed dull, lifeless. The joy had been siphoned out of everything she once held dear. This period was the peak of her emotional entrapment. She was a bird in a golden cage, the bars of which were made of fear, societal expectation, and Mr. Lee's absolute control. She longed for a release, a moment of true freedom, but saw no way out. The memory of Mr. Kim, the young woman's plea, and now the casual brutality Mr. Lee had revealed, all weighed on her. A heavy, suffocating blanket of guilt and despair. She was suffocating, slowly, silently, in a world that offered her everything material, but stripped her of everything human. The gilded life had become a living hell. One evening, everything changed. Hannah was in Mr. Lee's private study, a room he usually kept locked, searching for a misplaced book she thought might be there. He was out, as he often was, on one of his business trips. She wasn't looking for anything specific, just a distraction from the quiet dread that always filled the house when he was gone. Tucked away in a hidden compartment of his desk beneath a stack of old financial ledgers, she found a small, unmarked USB drive. Curiosity, a feeling she hadn't indulged in years, pushed her to plug it into the computer. What she saw on that drive shattered her complacency entirely. It wasn't just evidence of his criminal enterprise. It was something far worse. something that went beyond simple racketeering or illicit trade. There were detailed files, encrypted and carefully labeled, documenting a network of human trafficking. Young women, some barely out of their teens, their faces blurred, their personal details meticulously recorded, and among them, a familiar name, a girl from her old neighborhood, someone she had known since childhood, who had mysteriously disappeared years ago. The girl's file contained a photograph, a recent one, showing her looking thin and scared, a stark contrast to the bright, hopeful girl Hannah remembered. This wasn't just about money or power anymore. This was about lives, innocent lives, being destroyed, and someone she cared about was caught in it. The casual brutality Mr. Lee had shown before, the dismissive wave of his hand, now seemed like a prelude to this horror. A cold, hard knot formed in Hannah's stomach. This wasn't a crime she could simply be a silent witness to. This was monstrous. The images burned into her mind, erasing all doubt, all fear, all the lingering hope that he might somehow change. There was no changing this man. In that moment, a definitive, life-altering decision solidified within her. She would extricate herself from his world, not just emotionally, but physically and legally. It wasn't a dramatic outburst or a tearful breakdown. It was a quiet, internal resolve, as solid and unyielding as steel. She would bring him down, not for revenge, but for justice, for the innocent, and for her own soul. The fear was still there, a chilling whisper, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce, protective anger. This fundamental shift in her trajectory was silent, unseen, but it was absolute. The very next day, Mr. Lee's behavior escalated to an unprecedented level of cruelty. He returned from his trip in a foul mood, his eyes dark with a cold fury she had never seen before. He accused her of trivial things, yelling at her for imaginary slights, his voice echoing through the opulent house. He smashed a vase, a gift from her mother, then simply walked away, leaving her to clean up the mess. It was as if the universe was pushing her, confirming her decision, showing her there was no turning back. His recklessness, his complete disregard for anything but his own volatile emotions, was a clear sign. Then an unexpected opportunity arose. Hannah remembered a quiet, older woman, Mrs. Park, who ran a small dry cleaning business near her old neighborhood. Mrs. Park had always been kind to Hannah, a distant relative of a friend, and had a reputation for being fiercely independent and incredibly discreet. She was known to have connections, a network of whispers and favors that ran deep within the community, often helping those in trouble without asking questions. Hannah decided she would reach out to Mrs. Park. A slim chance, but a chance nonetheless. This confluence of Mr. Lee's extreme behavior and the glimmer of a possible ally broke the cycle of suffering. It wasn't a path to immediate freedom, but it was a path out of the darkness, a first step towards exposing his vulnerabilities and reclaiming her life. The narrative had irrevocably changed. Hannah felt a wave of cold fear after making her decision. The weight of what she was planning, the sheer power Mr. Lee held, pressed down on her. Doubts whispered in her mind, questions about her safety, her ability to pull this off. She knew the risks were huge. Her hands trembled as she thought about facing him, about the life she was about to shatter. Shame also gnawed at her, a deep, bitter shame for letting things get this far, for being complicit even in silence. She had married this man, lived in his house, accepted his gifts. Now she was going to betray him, and the thought was a heavy burden. One evening, after another tense dinner, where Mr. Lee had barely spoken, only giving her sharp, accusatory looks, Hannah couldn't hold it in anymore. She locked herself in her room, the opulent surroundings suddenly feeling like a cage. The years of suppressed pain, the guilt over the lives he had ruined, the terror of his unpredictable moods, all burst forth. She didn't cry silently. It was a raw, guttural sound, a scream that never left her throat, but tore through her insides. She punched the silk pillow again and again until her knuckles ached. Each strike was for a broken promise, a veiled threat, a stolen innocence. It was an explosion of everything she had held back, a desperate attempt to purge the poison from her soul. Her first call was to Mrs. Park. The old woman's voice was calm and steady, a comforting anchor in Hannah's storm. Mrs. Park listened without interruption, her silence more reassuring than any words could have been. When Hannah finished, there was a long pause. "Hannah, see," Mrs. Park finally said, her voice soft but firm. "This is a dangerous path, but you are not alone." She offered to meet, discreetly, outside the usual community circles. Hannah felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark in the darkness. Mrs. Park was an unexpected ally, someone who understood the unspoken rules, the hidden currents of their community. Not everyone was as supportive. When whispers of Hannah's distress, carefully planted by Mrs. Park, began to circulate, some reacted with fear. Auntie Kim, a distant relative who always prided herself on her connections, suddenly became distant. She stopped returning Hannah's calls, her fear of Mr. Lee's wrath clearly outweighing any family loyalty. Others, like Mr. Choi, a business associate of Mr. Lee's, became outright hostile. He saw Hannah as a threat to his own interests, his loyalty to Mr. Lee absolute. He spread rumors, trying to discredit her, hinting that she was unstable, ungrateful. These reactions, born of fear and self-preservation, intensified Hannah's psychological burden. She saw how quickly people could turn, how deeply Mr. Lee's influence ran. The cultural expectations regarding marriage and family honor weighed heavily. Many believed a wife should stand by her husband no matter what. To leave Mr. Lee, to expose him, would bring shame not just to her, but to her entire family, even if they had no part in it. The idea of losing face was a powerful deterrent, a silent threat that kept many in line. It made Hannah's decision even harder, knowing she was going against generations of tradition, risking ostracization. The profound psychological impact of her actions and the anticipated response from Mr. Lee and the community was immense. Every step she took felt like walking on glass, fragile and dangerous. But she knew there was no turning back. She had to see this through. Hannah began the long, hard process of putting her life back together. First, she left the city, choosing a quiet coastal town where the ocean breeze felt like a clean slate. She rented a small apartment, simple and bright, a stark contrast to the opulence she had left behind. There were no heavy curtains, no gilded furniture, just natural light and the sound of waves. This physical distance was the first step in reclaiming her space, both literally and emotionally. She started therapy, talking through the years of fear and control, slowly unraveling the knots of trauma that had built up inside her. It was painful, like pulling out splinters one by one. But with each session, she felt a little lighter, a little more like herself. Her artistic aspirations, long buried under Mr. Lee's expectations, slowly resurfaced. She bought a small sewing machine and began sketching designs again. Simple, elegant pieces that reflected her newfound freedom. The fabric felt good in her hands, a tangible connection to the dreams she had almost forgotten. She sold a few pieces at a local craft market, small victories that fueled her confidence. It wasn't about becoming a famous designer anymore. It was about creating, about finding joy in the process, about proving to herself that she still had something beautiful to offer the world. Meanwhile, Mr. Lee's world began to crumble. The information Hannah had carefully gathered, combined with the anonymous tips Mrs. Park had skillfully disseminated, led to a series of investigations. His carefully constructed facade of legitimate business dealings started to crack under scrutiny. News reports, initially vague, grew more specific, detailing allegations of money laundering, extortion, and violence. His network of loyalists, once so impenetrable, began to fray as individuals, fearing for their own futures, started cooperating with authorities. The arrests came swiftly, a domino effect that brought down key figures in his organization. Mr. Lee, once untouchable, found himself isolated, his power base eroding with each passing day. The justice served was quiet, methodical, and deeply satisfying. It wasn't a dramatic showdown, but a slow, inevitable unraveling, a consequence of his own actions finally catching up to him. His reputation, once a shield, became his greatest vulnerability, irrevocably damaged in the eyes of the community he had once controlled. Hannah found a new sense of peace, a quiet contentment she hadn't known was possible. She reconnected with her true self, a woman who was strong, creative, and independent. She allowed herself to form genuine, healthy relationships, built on trust and mutual respect, not fear or obligation. There was a gentle, kind man she met at the local library, a history teacher who loved books as much as she did. Their conversations were easy, filled with shared laughter and understanding, a stark contrast to the suffocating silence she had endured for so long. Her journey wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real. It was a testament to her resilience, a powerful statement of her strength. She often sat by the ocean, watching the waves roll in, reflecting on everything she had been through. The pain was still a part of her story, a scar that reminded her of where she had been, but it no longer defined her. She had faced darkness and emerged into the light, not unscathed, but whole. The unexpected warmth she found wasn't in a grand gesture or a sudden rescue, but in the slow, steady process of reclaiming her own life, in the quiet strength of her spirit, and in the simple joy of being truly free. She had survived, she had rebuilt, and she had discovered that the most profound warmth often comes from within, radiating outwards, warming the world she now chose to inhabit.